Shah, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shah, Barakatah Yahweh Shah, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shah.
Because the scriptures say 2/3 are going to be cut off and die, right? So the third part that's going to be left, how is the 2/3 going to come back? The 2/3 are going to come back through the 1/3. The 1/3 that make it out of here, out of this destruction, from being here in Babylon, and the ones that are scattered throughout the rest of the four corners of the earth that the angels pick up and take in the chariots. When we come back down to this earth after the destruction, the ones that die are going to be bred back by the ones that make it. 2/3 are going to be cut off and die, but they're going to come back in the kingdom as the children of the 1/3. They're going to come back and they're going to get it right this time. And this side right here, they're going to have to be sacrificed.
It shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God.
Isaiah 60 and 21 and 22, points in 22. Thy people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. So this is talking about when we're set up in the kingdom, a little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. That's talking about the men of Israel. We're going to have so many children. One man is going to have 1,000 children. And then another man is going to have so many children. It's going to be like a strong nation. And it's just going to be his children. And each man, we're going to multiply like that. We're going to have children upon children. But like I said, the Lord is going to restore us. He's going to restore us in the kingdom. We're going to get that ancient world stature and strength. We're going to get all that back.
Barakatah Yahweh Shah, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shah.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Kapadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to us younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds. In the name of Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures to faith in Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. All right, and just a continuation, the book of 2nd Kings. And we made to the 23rd chapter, and we're still, in the era of Josiah. All right, as we stated, the last chapter, this will be the last, righteous, king of Judah, before Judah, slips all the way into wickedness, and goes in captivity to the Babylonians, and what we're going to see in 2nd Kings, the 23rd chapter, is a reform, like never before, because, the kings before, Josiah, they were considered, pleasing to the Lord of the southern kingdom, they will partially do right, and they left a lot of, pagan, altars and, shrines and, statues, they left them up, all right, but we're going to see Josiah clean house, and this chapter reminds me of being, born again in Yahweh Shai, which we will get into that topic as well. Okay. But we're going to see a true, spiritual reform, under Josiah. Okay. Which we know. All right. Josiah. All right. Which when you uh go into his name, it goes into, the Lord's healing. Okay. So when you let's start here. Okay, Second Kings. All right, 23:1. Because we know, before we start healing in the spirit, we have to detox, okay, pagan Babylon, all right, aka Rome, aka Egypt, because America is a conglomerate, of pagan culture, idolatrous culture, all right, Satanism, okay, and before we begin to heal, in Yahweh Shai, we had to go through that major detox, okay, of everything, that we was cultivated in this kingdom, Now, when you go to Second Kings 23:1, it said, then the king summoned all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. After the king went up to the temple of the Lord with all the people of Judah and Jerusalem, along with the priests and prophets, all the people from the least, okay, to the greatest, there the king, all right, read to them the entire book of the covenant that had been found in the Lord's temple. So Josiah, is rededicate, okay, this generation of Israelites to the Lord. Okay, and we're gonna go into another account. All right, this is similar to what Moses did when we first came into a covenant with Yahweh Bashim Al Shai, which Moses was a mediator. I said the king took his place of authority beside the pillar and renewed the covenant in the Lord's presence. He pledged to obey the Lord by keeping all his commandments, laws, and decrees with all his heart and soul. In this way, he confirmed all the terms of the covenant that were written in the scroll, and all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. All right, so this is similar to a rededication back to Yahweh Shema Shai, which in this time, we've been rededicated, okay, and it's through grace, okay, not the keeping of the commandments, which we keep them to the best of our ability, okay, but within this grace period, we obey Yahweh Shai, which is to love the Lord, with all our heart, mind, and soul, which keeps us from, idolatry, paganism, okay, and love thy neighbor, all right, which is our fellow Israelite, is thyself, okay, so let's go here, okay, to Exodus, when you had that original agreement, okay, between Israel and the Most High, okay. So you go here, um, to the book of Exodus 24, okay. This book of Exodus 24:1. It says, then the Lord instructed Moses, come here, all right, come up here to me, and bring along Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. All of you must worship from a distance. Only Moses is allowed to come near, all right, the Lord Yahweh Bashim Al Shai. The others must not come near, and none of the other people are allowed to climb up, all right, the mountain with him. Then Moses went down, all right, to the people and repeated all the instructions and regulations the Lord had given them. All the people answered with one voice, we will do everything the Lord Yahweh Bashim Al Shai has commanded. Okay, so just like during the time of Josiah, okay, Moses, was the mediator, and he read all the law, okay, the instructions of the book, okay, the blessings and the curses. Okay, well, Salaki, he wrote the law, okay, because uh Deuteronomy was the blessings and the curses that came with the law. And this was before Deuteronomy. So he read them all the law, okay, and the people agreed, to keep, okay, that law, okay, just as during the time of Josiah. So this is the original, dedication, okay, of the covenant, the Lord, you know, and the children of Israel making an agreement, that we will be obedient, okay, and the Lord, will be our power. And it was like a marriage, okay, two parties, making an agreement, made vows, okay, and we as a people broke ours. Okay, we initiated the divorce, all right, in layman terms of today. And you had another account when you go here in the book of Maccabees, when our people fell away to you know Hellenization, okay, when the temple, all right, was defiled, by the Greeks, all right, but you had a remnant, okay, which, Judas Maccabees and, the men, all right, that fought with him represent a remnant, okay, that fought against wickedness. Now, this is after, okay, the Lord, had given, the victory to Judas Maccabees and his, and his men, okay, and the temple had been defiled, so after the fighting is done, and they make it to the temple, okay, this is what they see, all right. But then what would they do? They would rededicate, the temple. It says when they saw the sanctuary desolate and the altar profane and the gates burnt up and the shrubs growing into the courts as in a forest or in one of the mountains, yeah, and the priest's chambers pulled down, they rent their clothes and made great lamentation and cast ashes upon their heads. So they was, in mourning, when they seen the state of the temple. Okay, and that's the when we see the state of our people, it'll put you in a state of like, God damn, today. Okay, when you look at Jake and the state that they're in, okay, men, women, and children, man, it's like, God damn. Okay, and niggas keep getting worse, and that's why we understand why the Lord, okay, just had to end Jake legacy here, man. All right, niggas and the nigga woman legacy here, man, because it's like a ruined temple. Okay, and it has to be torn down. Okay, and the remnant make up the new temple that's being built. Those lively stones whom the Lord is using to build a new temple. Okay, and 2/3 they're gonna have to just be born into it. Okay, and it says and fell down flat on the ground upon their faces and blew an alarm with the trumpets and cried towards heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary. Okay, which we're being cleansed by this word now. Our minds have to be cleansed. Our minds are being sanctified, set apart. Okay, from this world. It says so he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law. Okay, which the Lord is raising up. A generation of priests in this time, kings and priests. Okay, such as had pleasure in the law, in which we know we can't keep the law perfectly, but we do delight in the righteousness of our power, man. And we rehearse it to the best of our ability. All right, it says, who cleanse the sanctuary and bear out the defiled stones into an unclean place. Okay, you see, it says, and when as they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profane, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them because of the heathen had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down, man. So they just like, look, it's been so defiled, it just got to be pulled down. you know, and just like scriptures speak about how this word is casting down strongholds, what it's speaking of in our mind, and there were strongholds that had to be, torn down. Okay, you can't refine feminism, you can't refine nigger culture, Christianity. Those things have to be completely torn down. Okay, it's defiled. You can't build on those things. You can't. That's not an acceptable sacrifice to the Lord. The conduct that's attached, to those doctrines, man, and many more. Okay, he says, and laid up the stones in the mountains of the temple in the covenant place, in the convenient place, until there should come a prophet to show, all right, what should be done with them. Then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar according to the former. All right, all things are become new. They that are in Yahweh is a new creature, and all things, okay, have become new. If a brother want to put that, 2 Corinthians 5:17. Okay, and it says, then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar according to the former, and made up the sanctuary and the things which were within the temple, and hallowed the courts, They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick and the altar of burnt offerings and of incense on the table. And upon the altar they burnt incense, and the lamps that were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light. Okay. In the temple, furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table and spread out the vials and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now on the 25th day of the ninth month, which is called the month, all right, Cash Lu, in the 148th year, they arose up betimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offering which they had made. Okay, it says, look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it, even okay, and that was it dedicated with songs and right and cymbals, okay, yeah, harps and cymbals, okay. And it says, then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the power of heaven who had given them this good success, okay. And that was during the time of, the rededication, the feast of dedication. That's where you get, which we still reverence that to this day, some, more than others, but it's a day that some brothers reverence, if you can. All right, it's not a mandate, but it comes around, all right, during the beginning of the winter. Okay. But going back, to the book of Second Kings. All right. I think Mr. Brother got that for me. All right, go back to Second Kings 23. Okay. Let's go here real quick. The brother got it. Uh get this. Oh, this the brother Gashan 72. 2 Corinthians 5 and 17. It said, therefore, if any man be in Hamashiach, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Okay. So just as we seen with Josiah, okay, he's beginning to rededicate, okay, that generation to the Lord. Okay. We seen during the time of Maccabees, they had to get rid of a lot of those vessels and things that were defiled, and they had to just go back new. Okay, they didn't try to salvage. Okay, those things that were defiled, they just went back new. And this in the spirit, this represents us. Getting rid of all the filth. Okay, that was cultivated in us in this society, and going back new with the righteousness of the Lord. Rededicating ourselves, man. Okay, and this another one the brother got. 1 Corinthians 3 and 17 says, if any man defile the temple of the Most High, him shall the Most High destroy. For the temple of the Most High is holy, which temple ye are. So we're the Lord's temple. Okay, and that's why there's an expectation that we have, understanding that the Spirit of the Lord dwells in us. Okay, and this is why we keep ourselves, as separate as possible, from this world and the defilement of it. We're in the midst of it. Okay, but being joined to this world, knowing that the Lord is using our vessels, to house His presence, His Spirit. Okay, so we are not our own. Okay, as it says in Corinthians as well. So let's get back to this. To why for that precept. Um, so 2 Kings 23 and 4 said, then the king instructed Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second rank and the temple gatekeepers to remove from the Lord's temple all the articles that were used to worship Baal, Asherah, all right, and all the powers of the heavens. The king had all these things burned outside Jerusalem on the on terraces of the Kidron Valley, and he carried the ashes away, okay, to Bethel. He did away with the idolatrous priests who had been appointed by the previous kings of Judah, for they had offered sacrifices at the pagan shrines throughout Judah, and even in the vicinity of Jerusalem, they had offered sacrifices to Baal, all right, the sun, the moon, the constellation, and to all the powers of of heavens, man. So over, the generations, man, Jerusalem just had become saturated with idolatry, man. Especially that of, Baal. All right, it was those damn Canaanites, man. So you keep reading, said the king removed, all right, the astral pole from the Lord's temple and took it outside Jerusalem to the Kindred Valley where he burnt it. Then he ground the ashes of the pole to dust and threw the dust over the graves Salaki of the people. He also tore down the living quarters of the male and female shrine prostitutes that were inside the temple of the Lord, where the woman, all right, wove coverings, all right, where the women wove coverings for the Asherah pole, which, the Asherah pole goes into basically the queen of heaven, so this ain't nothing new. All right, the woman, especially, they of Judah or the southern tribes, heavy into the queen of heaven, even in Jeremiah. All right, there was a major problem during the time of Jeremiah to the women. They was telling Jeremiah pretty much, we're not gonna listen to nothing the Lord says. We're gonna keep doing what we're doing. All right, baking cakes to the queen of heaven. Okay, they became extremely rebellious. So you go here, real quick, just to go into those male and female, all right, shrine prostitutes, man. Okay, because you had, two different types of harlots in the Bible. Those harlots that King Solomon, judged between. Okay, those wasn't shrine prostitutes. Now, being a prostitute was a shameful thing, and it wasn't the ideal, situation for an Israelite woman, but it would happen. Okay, and there was a difference between, a prostitute, that was her, that was her income, all right, to make a living off of, and the one that was a shrine prostitute. Okay, because you go into it, in the Bible, it says a shrine prostitute, also called a temple prostitute, was a person, male or female, who engaged in sexual acts as part of a pagan religious rituals, often in a near temples, in or near temple dedicated to false gods like Baal, Asherah, or other Canaanite deities, man. Okay, which Esau comes in the spirit. Okay, these Canaanite deities, man. Okay, it says the practice of shrine prostitution was common among the Canaanites and other pagan religions surrounding Israel. It involved a ritual sex. It says it involved ritual sex acts. All right, meant to invoke fertility or favor from the gods. This was directly opposed to the worship of Yahweh, the power of Israel, who condemned such practice as idolatrous and immoral. It says key biblical references: Deuteronomy 23:17 and 18. It says, no Israelite man or woman, this is the NIV, is to become a shrine prostitute. You must not bring the earnings of a female prostitute or a male prostitute into the house of the Lord, your power to pay any vow, because the Lord, your power, detests them both. Okay, and these shrine prostitutes, okay, they was in the temple, you had the orgies, you had, homosexuality, you had, it's just freakism, man. Okay, and you look at the all right, when you go here, and Jake was into that, because it will put them in favor, with the heathens. Jake was able to strike, certain trade deals, and have particular things going on with the heathens, and then Jake will get to participate, okay, in these orgies, and just random sex, and women having trains ran on. That was a common thing in Babylon. As a woman, those were a rite of passage. To go to the temple, okay, and have a train ran on you. Just random men. You know, that was a normal thing. Okay, when you go into the Church of Babylon, that was a normal thing. Okay, so when you go here, it says cultural and religious significance. It says these acts were not simply sexual; they were ritualistic, believed to bring blessings and fertility for crops, livestock, and people. They were often sanctioned, and embedded in religious systems hostile to Israel's power. This is why such practices are frequently condemned in the Old Testament. They blended idolatry, sexual immorality, and corrupted Israel's worship, man. Okay? And when you go down, I asked it, could Hollywood, okay, be compared to a Babylonian church? Okay, because we have to understand these Beyoncé's and Sexy Reds and Sierras and all these, women, okay, of the music entertainment, the Hollywood, Gabriel Union, where these all be likened to temple harlots, okay, and what they do, they influence men, okay, in the way of idolatry, all right, because to appease, because the masses of the women imitate those women, okay, and in order to appease those women, well, you have to, okay, come under the influence of those different deities, okay, to appeal to certain women. You have to be a certain type of way as a man, okay, which that's what those temple harlots would do, would be convince you, okay, in the ways of those other gods, all right, King Solomon, even his women, okay, they brought that, and he's going to go into that when we keep going into the book of Second Kings, okay. It says, what is a Babylonian church? It says, in biblical symbolism, Babylon is often used as a representation of spiritual corruption, idolatry, moral decadence, obsession to the most opposition to the most high truth. For example, in Revelation 17 and 18, Babylon is portrayed as a symbolic figure, which it's America, man. Okay, now America is Babylon and great. Okay, and it's one big Babylonian church, man. Especially in Hollywood is the the priesthood. Okay, and where you have a lot of celebrities and their lower level witches and warlocks. It's often interpreted as a corrupt religious or cultural system drunk with immorality and the blood of the saints, the Israelites. Okay, it says a great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her, kings of the earth, is Revelation 17, 1 and 2. They said kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries, man, because you would go into those temples, okay, and it would just be wine, women and just freakism. Okay, and America is likened to a shrine prostitute, a temple harlot, okay, that influences, because you go into that temple, man, it was like going into a whole nother, realm. It was going down. And Jake, you see, Jake, took their freak ass in there and it was no turning back. Okay. You see, and Jake was just hooked onto, idolatry, man, because, that do as I will. Okay. And it says Hollywood is a cultural powerhouse. It says Hollywood is a global center of entertainment, shaping worldviews through film and TV, celebrity influence, fashion and beauty standards, cultural narratives about sexuality, morality, identity, and religion. Okay, because most people are imitating what? Hollywood. Okay, whatever, you look at how most people are, where they're imitating things that they seen, all right, on movies. That's why this world is very synthetic, it's not natural, because everyone's playing some type of character that they've seen, all right, on movies or TV shows, or through music videos. Okay, it's a very synthetic society, man. And it says some critics, especially from conservative or religious perspective, argue that Hollywood promotes moral moral relativism or decadence, hypersexualization, materialism and fame, and anti-Messiah or post, all right, Messiah values, man. And this is all right, goes back, okay, to these ancient, all right, customs, okay, of the heathen, okay. It just, like I say, Esau just has the most technology, man. Okay, now uh let's go back to Second Kings. All right, this is the book of Second Kings 23. and 7, it says, I started at 8. It said Josiah brought to Jerusalem all the priests who were living in the other towns of Judah. He also defiled the pagan shrines where they had offered sacrifices all the way from Gabah to Beersheba. He destroyed the shrines at the entrance to the gate of Joshua, the governor of Jerusalem. This gate was located to the left of the city gate as one, okay, as one entered the city. It says the priests who served at the pagan shrines were not allowed to serve at the Lord's altar in Jerusalem, but they were allowed it, all right, with the other priests. Then the king defiled the altar of Tophah, all right, in the valley of Ben Hinnom, okay, so no one could ever, okay, again use it to sacrifice a son or daughter in the fire as an offering to Molech. And when you go into Ben Hinnom, all right, which is, there was a place when you go, let's go here, all right, where Jake will offer, their children to Molech, all right, and the valley, okay, because you had, let me see, yeah, you go Hinnom, okay, which in the Hebrew, all right, is Hanam, okay, which means lamentation, okay. Now, when you go into, all right, the Scrolls, okay, wailing. Now it says, from cries of children, okay, from cries of children, and you remember when you Howard shot and when you go down, okay, later, you know, it was translated to Gehenna, okay, and when you get into the word hell, okay, in the New Testament, well, one of the words is Gehenna, okay, which just goes back, to the valley of Hinnom, okay, where Jake, was sacrificed, okay, their children to Molech, you know, and you all also have, animal corpse will be thrown down there, all right, and then, where the fire, how Shah said, where the fire is not quenched, and he was speaking of the nuclear destruction and the fire of the chariots that was coming upon this generation, and he likened it to Hinnom, a place where, they would have those inhumane sacrifices of those children. And that's why I say what weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, because you can imagine the pain that those children were going through, that weeping and gnashing of teeth because of their pain. Okay, so you get Isaiah 66 and 24. Okay, which we went, brothers that went deep into this topic, debunking hell. But when you read it, okay, Isaiah 66 and 24 says, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcass of the man that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall, for there the worm shall not die. Okay, and there was likening the judgment that was to come in this time of the nukes and the fire from the chariot to the valley of Hinnom. Okay, because some animals wouldn't make it down to the fire, and you will have maggots and worms, okay, that will eat those animals, okay. And then it's saying that so you always had worms, okay, in that area, all right. It would mean that the worms were immortal. It was just there was worms, always there, okay, that would eat those carcasses that didn't make it into the fire. It said, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh, man. Okay, so Yahweh Shah was likening the judgment, okay, of this time that's to come with fire to what was going on in the valley of Hinnom. Okay, it wasn't talking about a place, on the ground where you burn, for hell forever. Okay, and Satan, okay, is poking you with a pitchfork. All right, laughing. You see, it had nothing to do with that. Okay, so you go, and we tell you we went into that, but since we was since it came up in this chapter, just touch on that again. But yeah, so let's go here. um back to 2 Kings 2, okay, and 10. Um 11. When 11 says, and he took away the horses. All right, he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had given, all right, to the son, okay, at the entry near the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nathan Malak, the chamberlain, which was in the suburbs, and burned the chariots, okay, of the son with fire. Okay, and now, it's showing you that, even these Roman gods go back to these Canaanite deities, okay, because you go into, because he spoke about, the kings of Judah. He took away the horses, these statues of horses that the king of Judah had given to the son, okay, and the chariots. Now, when you go into images of Apollos, the sun god, during the time of the Romans, okay, you go into these images, okay, and what do you see? All right, you see Apollos, okay, this chariot and those horses. Okay, so Jake was doing this way back when, you see, and this is, the Romans, okay, called it Apollos, okay, but it goes back to, the worship of sun god. There's been many names for these different sun gods that these heathens will worship, okay, but it goes back to Apollos, okay, well, this is Apollos, which is all goes back to the gods of Samaria and Canaan, man, all right, and then Hamites, okay, so then you go from there, because even I say the Greeks, you know, and the Greco-Romans both, was worshiping those sun gods. All right. So going back, just wanted to show that. But going back to 2 Kings 23 and 12, it says, in the altars that were on the top of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, did the king beat down and break them down from thence, and cast the dust of them in the brook of Kindred. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the mount, all right, of corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built it to Ashtaroth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. So those high places and altars, and that King Solomon built, they was never torn down until Josiah. So they had been there generations, man. Going, this is probably 250 years maybe after Solomon, 250 give or take, years after King Solomon, man. You see? So Josiah is coming through and just clean the house, man. All the paganism or anything that was, all right, of any type of pagan or shrine or idolatry, Josiah was coming through and clean the house, And that's how we have to be, with ourselves, man. Constantly reevaluating, and and seeing what we can get rid of, man. That's linked, okay, to the idolatry of this place, man. It says that he break in pieces the images and cut down the groves and filled, all right, their places with the bones of men. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high places which Jerome, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, both that altar and the high place he break down and burnt the high place and stamped it, all right, small to powder, and burnt the grove. And as Josiah turned himself, he spied the sepulchres that were in the mount, okay, and sent and took the bones out of the sepulchres and burnt them upon the altar and polluted it according to the word of the Lord, which the man of the Most High proclaimed. All right. The man of the Most High proclaimed, I think that was Elijah, okay, proclaimed, who proclaimed these words. You see, I think that was Elijah that prophesied of Josiah. Okay, let me look it up real quick. Okay. It was in First Kings. Yep, so it's in First Kings 13:1. Okay, it doesn't give the name of the prophet. Okay, well, this First Kings 13:1. Okay, so this way back. Okay, so this First Kings 13:1, it says, "And behold, there came a man, or rather Most High of Judah, by the words of the Lord unto Bethel, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord Yahweh Bashim al Shah, behold, a child shall be born into the house of David, Josiah by name. Okay, and upon thee shall he offer, all right, the priests, all right, of the high places that burn incense upon them, and men's bones shall be burnt, okay, upon thee. Okay, so Josiah and what he was going to do, was prophesied during the time of Jeroboam, and that was when the kingdom first split. So like I said, it's like over 250 years before Josiah. He was prophesied to come do, what he came to do. You know, so like I'm saying, that's the spirit of the prophets today, man. And you see that spirit beginning, with the apostle and elders of GMS, man. That spirit of just cleaning house, man. Tearing down all things that oppose himself to the Most High, man. Okay, within us. Okay, he's doing it to a physical temple. Okay, but now, we're the temple. And these strongholds and these customs and anything attached to paganism is being torn down, man. All right, it says verse 17. It says 2 Kings 23:17. Then he said, "What title is that I see?" And the men of the city told him, "It is the sepulchre of the man of the Most High, which came from Judah, and proclaimed these things that thou hast done against the altar of Bethel." And he said, "Let him alone. Let no man move his bones." So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet that came out of Samaria. And all the houses also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke, all right, the Lord to anger, Josiah took away and did to them according to all the acts that he had done in Bethel. And he slew all the priests of the high places that were there upon the altars, and burnt men's bones upon them, and returned to Jerusalem. Okay? It says, "And the king," so hey, Josiah cleared house, man. "And the king commanded all the people, saying, Keep the Passover unto the Lord your power, as it is written in the book of this covenant. Surely there was not holding such a Passover from the days of the judges that judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel, nor of the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, wherein the Passover was holding to the Lord in Jerusalem, moreover, the workers with familiar spirits and the wizards and the images and the idols and the abominations that were spied, all right, in the land, okay, of Judah and in Jerusalem, did Josiah put away, that he might perform the words of the law, which were written in the book of Hilkiah, the priest, found in the house of the Lord Yahweh Bashim al Shah. And like unto him there was, uh, and like unto him was there no king before him that turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and all his might, according to all of Moses, all right, all the law of Moses. Neither after him arose there any like him. Okay, and he would be the last, good king of Judah. Okay, before the collapse. All right, it says, notwithstanding, the Lord turned not from the fierceness, of his great wrath. So even though Josiah, did their great reform, the Lord already had it in motion. All right, that he was going to, because you look at all Josiah had to do, man, that was just decades and generations of just constantly infusing, paganism, amongst Israel, man, amongst the southern kingdom. Okay, the Lord was pissed, man. So he will have, mercy on Josiah. okay, or the nation, okay, the southern kingdom, man, they was gonna be punished. Okay, you best believe he allowed a lot of them wicked spirits and wicked Israelites to come back during the time of the Babylonian invasion, man. Okay, it says, notwithstanding, the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his great wrath, wherewith his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all provocation that Manasseh had provoked, all right, him withal. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel, and will cast this city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house of which I said my name, all right, shall be there. Okay. So it's already set in stone. So now it's just a matter of time. Build up to that. It says, now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up, okay, against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and the king Josiah went against him, and he slew him in Megiddo when he had seen him. Okay, so that was, Josiah's fate. He died in war. Okay, and it says, and his servants carried him in a chariot, dead from Megiddo, and brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own sepulchre. And the people of the land took Jehoaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him, and made him king in his father's stead. Jehoaz was 20 and 3 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all his father had done. All right. So now, hey, the generation is back. All right. Back to the shit. It says, and Pharaoh Necho put him in bands at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and put the land to a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So he took, he put a puppet king in Israel. So now you're seeing, Egypt, pretty much has Judah, on the tributary. Okay, so Judah's sovereignty, okay, the southern tribe sovereignty is dwindling. Okay, and it says, and Joachim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the commandment of Pharaoh. So he had to tax, the citizens of Israel to pay that tribute. He exacted the silver and gold of the people of the land of everyone according to his taxation to give unto Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 20 and 5 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zebudah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Ramah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all right, that his fathers had done. Okay, so now we're gonna see a downhill spiral from here. But Josiah, he did a great reform. He did a mighty cleansing in the temple. Okay, and like you said, the Lord, wouldn't bring the Babylonians during his time. Okay, but now we're in the time as Josiah is off the scene. Okay, that the Lord's getting ready to bring that hammer. Okay, but this, like I say, Josiah, was a let's go here in story, with that of a complete, renewal. Okay, that's why we go here in the book of uh Ephesians 4:21. It says, if so be that you have heard him, which is Yahweh Shai, and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Yahweh Shai, that ye put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lust, okay, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that ye put on the new man, which is after the Most High, is created in righteousness and true holiness, man. And this is what we begun to do, as we learned of Yahweh. We began to detox, okay, from Babylon, okay, and we begin to be restored in righteousness, okay, to Yahweh Bashim Shai, So that's the point, just wanted to get into that, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again. Want to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Kakadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to us younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutations, hopefully, shalom.